The morning light came in sideways through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Hartwell Manor, cutting long golden ribbons across the marble floors and dissolving into nothing before they ever reached the corners of the room. Those corners were always dark, always cool, always undisturbed, just the way Ethan Hartwell preferred them. At 33, Ethan had more wealth than 3 generations of his family could spend. His name appeared on the covers of Forbes, Fortune, and every financial publication that mattered. He owned the kind of properties that other billionaires sent their assistants to photograph just to show their friends. He had a jet that made intercontinental travel feel like moving between rooms in a very large house. He had a penthouse in Manhattan, a villa in Tuscany, a chalet in Aspen that had hosted 3 different heads of state. And here, in the rolling hills of Connecticut, he had Hartwell Manor, 12,000 square feet of architectural perfection that had been in his family for 2 generations and felt, in its most honest moments, like a very beautiful prison. He sat alone at the long mahogany table in the east sitting room, a room his mother had once decorated with the express purpose of making people feel welcomed. Cream-colored walls, soft linen drapes, a fireplace framed in pale stone that held real warmth when it was lit, framed photographs of countryside scenes, a room built for conversation, for laughter, for the comfortable silence that only exists between people who truly love each other. Ethan sat in it every morning like a man visiting a museum he owned but had never really understood. His tea was Earl Grey. Always Earl Grey. His housekeeper, Mrs. Calloway, a stout woman of 60 with no patience for drama and an iron command over the household staff, placed it before him every morning at precisely 7:45, without being asked. The cup was bone china. The saucer held a single shortbread biscuit he never ate. There was a folded newspaper to his left that he sometimes read and sometimes didn't, and beyond the window was a garden so meticulously maintained it looked like it had been painted there. Ethan picked up the cup and held it with both hands the way he always did when he was thinking or trying not to think, which were, if he was being honest with himself, essentially the same activity for him now. Steam curled upward and vanished. The thing about being very rich and very alone was that nobody believed you about the alone part. When he'd once mentioned it, carefully, obliquely, in an interview that he'd immediately regretted giving, the journalist had laughed and said, "That must be a difficult problem to have." The article ran under the headline, "Young Billionaire Ethan Hartwell, the Man Who Has Everything." He'd read it 3 times and felt like it was describing someone he'd never met. His parents were gone. His father to a heart attack 6 years ago, the kind that comes without warning on a Tuesday morning, quiet and absolute, no dramatic last words or final reconciliations. His mother to grief, he sometimes thought, though the official cause was pancreatic cancer 18 months later. She had stopped fighting the moment his father's absence became permanent, and he had watched that happen from a distance because neither of them had ever learned to reach across the space between them without his father acting as the bridge. He had an older sister, Caroline, who lived in London with her husband and their twin boys. They video called on birthdays and Christmas. She worried about him in the way busy people worry about things they cannot fix, with guilt and good intentions, and not quite enough time. He loved her and missed her, and had never once told her either of those things clearly enough for it to count. There had been relationships, of course. Women who were brilliant and beautiful, and who had looked at him, at first the way people look at something extraordinary, and then, after months of watching him keep them at arm's length behind the same glass walls that surrounded every part of his life, with a kind of bewildered hurt that always ended the same way. The last one, Serena, had cried when she left. Not because she was heartbroken, she'd said, and he believed her, but because she genuinely felt sorry for him. "You don't even know what you're doing," she'd told him. "You close the door, and you don't even realize you're on the wrong side of it." He'd thought about that sentence approximately 400 times since she'd said it. The estate employed 11 full-time staff members and several part-time contractors. They were professional, efficient, and carefully trained to provide service without intrusion, which meant that on most mornings, Ethan Hartwell sat at this beautiful table in this beautiful room in this beautiful house and did not speak to a single living soul until his 9 o'clock call with his executive team in New York. He'd hired a new housekeeper's assistant 3 weeks ago. He had not paid particular attention to the hiring. Mrs. Calloway handled staffing for the residential wing, and Ethan trusted her judgment absolutely, which meant he reviewed contracts without faces and approved names without stories. He knew there was a new person. He'd seen her once from the end of a hallway, a young woman moving quickly, carrying a stack of fresh linens, her dark hair pulled back, her expression focused and serious. He didn't know her name yet. He didn't know, that morning, as he lifted his Earl Grey and stared out at the too-perfect garden, that she had a daughter. A 3-year-old daughter with her mother's dark eyes and an apparently extraordinary immunity to social boundaries, inherited from no one anyone could identify, because the child had arrived into the world already convinced that it belonged to her in the most generous and loving way imaginable. He didn't know, as the steam curled upward from his cup and the morning held its breath, that the loneliness he'd worn for 6 years like a second skin, so familiar he'd stopped noticing its weight, was approximately 4 minutes away from being interrupted by 27 pounds of unstoppable, soft-cheeked, consequence-free human honesty. He just sat there, alone at the long mahogany table, holding his tea with both hands. Outside, the garden was perfectly, silently, achingly beautiful. Inside, Ethan Hartwell stared at it and felt the particular exhaustion of a man who has spent years being surrounded by loveliness he cannot feel. He took a sip of tea. He set the cup down. He exhaled long and slow, the way a person exhales when they are not sad exactly but rather empty, which is a different and in some ways heavier thing. The door at the far end of the sitting room opened 3 inches. Then it stopped. Ethan didn't look up. Staff came and went. It was part of the choreography of the household, movements he'd learned to register without registering, the way you stop hearing a clock after you've lived with it long enough. Then there was a small sound. Not a footstep. Not a voice, exactly. More like the sound of someone working up their courage. He looked up. And the world, without any announcement, without any warning, without any of the elaborate preparation that Ethan Hartwell applied to every significant moment of his adult life, began, quietly, to change. Her name was Maya. Her mother, whose name was Sophia Reyes, though Ethan wouldn't learn that for another 20 minutes, had specifically told her 3 things before leaving her in the small staff sitting room with a coloring book and a cup of apple juice while she finished turning down the guest suite on the 2nd floor. The 3 things were, stay in this room, do not touch anything that isn't yours, and please, baby, for the love of everything, do not wander. Maya had listened to all 3 instructions with the attentive, solemn expression of a child who fully intends to comply and has absolutely no idea that her intentions and her actions exist in completely separate universes. She'd colored for approximately 4 minutes. She'd drunk her apple juice. She'd looked at the door. She'd looked back at her coloring book. She'd looked at the door again. And then, because the door was slightly ajar and because the hallway beyond it smelled faintly of something warm and interesting, Earl Grey, though she had no word for it, only the sense that it was the kind of smell that belonged to someone who needed company, she had slid off her chair, taken 4 careful steps, and pushed the door open with the flat of her small hand. The hallway was long and marble-floored and, to a 3-year-old, absolutely magnificent. She was wearing her favorite leggings, the ones with the small strawberries on them, and her sneakers that lit up when she walked, and a soft pink sweatshirt that said sunshine in yellow letters, which was Everyone who knew Maya agreed. Extremely appropriate. Her dark hair was in two uneven pigtails because her mother had done them in a hurry this morning, distracted and apologetic, and the right one was slightly higher than the left, and Maya didn't mind at all. She walked down the hallway the way 3-year-olds walk, with a kind of whole-body commitment, arms swinging, sneakers flashing pink and white with every step, head moving to take in everything around her. A painting of horses made her stop and say, "Horsies," to no one. A large vase of fresh flowers made her lean in and inhale dramatically and then sneeze so hard she staggered sideways. She recovered, looked around to see if anyone had witnessed this, decided no one had, and continued her expedition. She wasn't lost, exactly. She was exploring, which is a different thing entirely, and the distinction mattered deeply to Maya even if she lacked the vocabulary to articulate it. The sitting room door was open 3 inches. She pushed it with one finger, the way you test water temperature, and peered inside. The room was large and soft-colored and warm, with morning light falling in long shapes across the floor. There was a fireplace, unlit, but impressive, and a table that was very long and very shiny. And at the far end of that long, shiny table, sitting with both hands wrapped around a cup and staring out the window at a garden, was a man. He was not old. Maya's understanding of age was largely binary. People were either big or really big, and this man was in the second category. He had dark hair and a kind of stillness about him that Maya, who was never still herself, found both curious and slightly confusing. He was wearing a dark sweater and he had a nice face, she decided. A face that wasn't angry or scary, or the kind of busy face that adults made when they didn't want to be bothered. He looked, more than anything, like a person sitting in a very large space with too much empty around them. Maya understood empty. She was 3, not ignorant. She pushed the door open another inch. Then another. The man didn't look up. She took one step into the room. Her sneaker flashed pink. She looked down at it, then back at the man, then completed the mathematics of a situation in the quick, instinctive way that children process human loneliness, not as a concept but as a feeling they recognize the way they recognize hunger or cold. She walked across the sitting room. Her sneakers left tiny, soundless traces across the Persian rug. She passed the fireplace. She passed a side table with a flower arrangement. She reached the long mahogany table and stopped at the corner nearest to him, which put her approximately 3 feet from where he sat, and she looked up at him with the direct, clear-eyed assessment of a child who has not yet learned that staring at people is considered impolite. He felt her presence before he saw her. Some shift in the air. Some change in the quality of the silence. He looked down, and there she was, 27 pounds of warm, dark-eyed, strawberry-legging certainty, looking up at him with an expression of pure, unfiltered evaluation. They regarded each other. Ethan was, for the first time in recent memory, completely at a loss. He was a man who negotiated billion-dollar mergers, who spoke calmly before rooms full of investors, who had once talked a business partner off the ledge of a terrible decision using nothing but measured logic and careful language. He was not, by any reasonable measure, a man who was easily unsettled. This 3-year-old was unsettling him. She continued to look at him, her head tilted slightly to the left, the higher pigtails swinging with emotion. And then she leaned forward, both small hands coming to rest on the edge of his chair, her chin dropping, her voice dropping too, into that particular register of children's whispers that are somehow louder than regular speech but feel like secrets anyway, and she said, "You look lonely. Can I sit with you?" The words landed in the center of Ethan Hartwell's chest like something thrown from a very great height. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He had spent 6 years and more money than he could calculate surrounding himself with advisors and staff and associates and acquaintances who were paid, directly or indirectly, to tell him what he wanted to hear. He had not, in all that time, had a single person look at him with clear eyes and simply, without agenda, without artifice, without anything in the world to gain from it, tell him the truth. "You look lonely." 3 words, delivered by a person who barely reached the tabletop. He felt something move in his chest that he hadn't felt in so long he almost didn't recognize it. Like a room in the house of himself that he'd locked years ago and stopped walking past, and now someone had simply opened the door without knocking, and light was falling in. "Sure," he heard himself say. His voice came out rougher than he intended. "You can sit with me." Her face broke into a smile of such complete and uncomplicated happiness that Ethan, who had not cried since his mother's funeral, felt his eyes sting. She grabbed the edge of his chair with both hands and began the serious business of climbing up, her sneakers flashing, her pigtails swinging, entirely confident that she'd been right to come in. She had. Sophia Reyes discovered that Maya was gone in the way mothers discover these things. Not with a slow dawning realization, but with an instantaneous, stomach-dropping certainty that is perhaps the most efficient alarm system the human body produces. She'd been in the guest suite for 12 minutes. She told herself that was fine. The staff sitting room had a closed door and apple juice and a coloring book, and Maya was a good girl, curious and warm and occasionally headstrong, but good. She knew not to wander. Sophia had told her 3 times. Sophia reminded herself as she abandoned the half-made bed and moved into the hallway at a pace just below running, had the attention span of a golden retriever puppy and a magnetic attraction to any room that was slightly more interesting than the one she was in. She checked the staff sitting room first. Door ajar. Coloring book open to a page of half-colored butterflies. Apple juice half finished. No Maya. Sophia's heart did the specific thing it did when Maya was unaccounted for, a rapid, lurching series of beats that felt less like a heartbeat and more like a distress signal. She began moving through the corridor. She checked the small linen room. Empty. She checked the hallway bathroom. Empty. She was about to check the service stairs when she heard something that stopped her in the middle of the corridor as surely as if someone had put a hand on her shoulder. A child's laugh. Bright, uncomplicated, delighted. The specific laugh that Maya produced when something was genuinely wonderful rather than just amusing. It was coming from the East sitting room. The East sitting room where Sophia's mind told her in a voice that was very calm and very terrible. Mr. Hartwell takes his morning tea every day from 7:45 to 9 o'clock and does not wish to be disturbed. Mrs. Calloway had made this clear on Sophia's first day with the particular emphasis of a woman who believes that some rules are load-bearing walls. Do not enter the East sitting room during morning tea. Do not make noise near the East sitting room during morning tea. Do not, by any action or inaction, disrupt the morning tea. Sophia was moving before she'd finished processing this. She reached the sitting room doorway and stopped. The scene inside stopped her more completely than any wall could have. Ethan Hartwell, the Ethan Hartwell, whose net worth had 7 zeros after it, who had been photographed shaking hands with presidents, who was, by every external measure, one of the most formidable men in American business, was sitting at the long mahogany table with Sophia's daughter in his lap, and he was making a tower out of the shortbread biscuits that Mrs. Calloway brought with his tea. Not one shortbread biscuit. There were at least 4 of them stacked in a careful column on the tea saucer, and Maya was watching this construction project with the focused intensity she normally reserved for YouTube videos about dinosaurs. Ethan's large hand moved with surprisingly careful precision, placing each biscuit with a delicacy that seemed entirely at odds with the image Sophia had built of him from a distance. Higher, Maya instructed, in the tone of someone who is the project manager and does not have time for doubt. "If I go higher," Ethan said, and his voice, Sophia registered this with a start, because she'd heard it only from a distance before, formal and measured, was different now. Quieter, warmer, like a radio finding its proper frequency. "It's going to fall. Then we build it again," Maya said, with the easy confidence of someone who has not yet learned to be frightened of things that fall. Something crossed Ethan's face. Sophia saw it from the doorway, a flicker of something that wasn't amusement exactly, something deeper than that, the expression of a person who has just been told something true without being told anything at all. He placed the fifth biscuit. The tower held for exactly 3 seconds. Then it fell, scattering biscuit pieces across the saucer, and Maya threw both hands up and shrieked with laughter, the pure, full-body laugh of a child for whom delight is not a performance but a reflex, and even from the doorway, Sophia saw Ethan's face do something extraordinary. He smiled. Not the polished, press-ready smile she'd seen in the framed magazine covers in the staff hallway. Not the controlled, purposeful expression of a man managing an impression. A real smile, slightly startled, slightly helpless. The smile of a person who has been caught off guard by joy and found that they don't entirely mind. Sophia's hand was over her mouth. She was also aware, in some calm back corner of her mind that was still functioning professionally, that she needed to remove her daughter from this man's lap immediately and apologize and almost certainly start looking for a new job. She stepped into the room. "Mr. Hartwell, I'm so sorry, I cannot even. Maya, come here right now, sweetheart." Both of them looked at her. Maya with the expression of someone who has been interrupted at the most interesting part of a story. Ethan with something that looked, and Sophia told herself she was probably imagining this because it made no sense, like disappointment. "She's not bothering me," he said. Sophia stopped. "I'm sorry," she said carefully because she wasn't sure she'd heard that correctly. "Your daughter," Ethan said, looking down at Maya with that same slightly startled expression, as if he was still adjusting to something, "is not bothering me." He looked back up at Sophia. "Please don't apologize." Maya looked between the two adults with the calm authority of someone who is already determined how this situation will resolve. Then she looked back at the scattered biscuit pieces. "We need more," she announced. And Ethan Hartwell, billionaire, orphan, man behind the glass, pressed the call button on the side table without hesitation. "Mrs. Calloway," he said, when the housekeeper appeared with the speed of a woman who had been expecting something unusual, "could we please have more shortbread?" And he glanced at Sophia with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Another cup. And something for the child. Whatever she might like." Mrs. Calloway looked at the scene before her. Her employer, the new staff member's toddler, the scattered biscuits, the morning newspaper untouched, and her face went through approximately 6 emotions in 4 seconds before settling into something that looked, if you knew her well enough to read her, remarkably like relief. "Of course, sir," she said. "Right away." Sophia stood in the doorway of the sitting room she was not supposed to enter, her heart doing complicated things, and watched her 3-year-old daughter reach up and pat Ethan Hartwell's forearm with one small hand in the absent, affectionate way that Maya patted things she decided she liked. He looked down at that small hand, and Sophia saw it again, that flicker, that thing behind the careful face. She recognized it because she knew what it felt like from the inside. It was the look of someone who has been lonely for so long they've forgotten they're allowed to be anything else. 3 weeks passed. They were not dramatic weeks. Nothing exploded or transformed. There was no single conversation that rearranged the furniture of anyone's understanding. Instead, things changed the way seasons change, imperceptibly from day to day, undeniably across the span of time. Maya, Having decided that the East sitting room was among her favorite places, and that the man who lived in it was firmly within her circle of people, continued to visit. Sophia had spoken to Mrs. Calloway about it on the third day, prepared to be told firmly and kindly that it was inappropriate and couldn't continue. Mrs. Calloway had looked at her over the rim of her reading glasses for a long moment, then said, "Mr. Hartwell has not complained, Mrs. Reyes. In 20 years of working for this family, I can tell you that if something bothers him, he says so. Has he said anything to you?" "No," Sophia admitted. "Then I suggest," Mrs. Calloway said, returning to her ledger, "that we proceed accordingly." And so they did. Sophia worked mornings 6 to noon, Tuesday through Saturday, and because the Manor's childcare arrangements for staff were one of the benefits Mrs. Calloway had mentioned during hiring, and because the arrangement that had emerged was apparently satisfactory to all parties involved, Maya came with her. She colored in the staff room. She ate her snacks. And on some mornings, not every morning, but with a frequency that increased gradually, the way water finds its own level, she made her way to the East sitting room. Ethan began keeping extra shortbread on the table. He did not announce this. He did not make any reference to it. One morning there was simply more shortbread than usual, and when Maya arrived and immediately targeted it with a laser focus she brought to all foods that were technically dessert, no one said anything about it. Sophia learned his schedule. Not deliberately, it was simply the nature of working in a household that you came to understand its rhythms. She knew that his 9 o'clock calls were always long and always left him quieter afterward. She knew that he walked the garden in the early evening when the weather permitted, alone, with his hands in his pockets and the particular posture of someone who is very accustomed to carrying themselves without being seen. She knew that he ate dinner alone every night in the formal dining room at a table that seated 20. She thought about that table sometimes. The 20 empty chairs. She understood, in the way that people understand things they haven't been told, but have felt themselves, what that kind of hollow space does to a person over time. Sophia Reyes had been many things in the 8 years since she'd left her hometown in Texas with nothing but a waitressing job lined up and a stubbornness her grandmother had always called her greatest virtue and her greatest weakness. She'd been a student. 2 years of night school before the money ran out. She'd been a barista, a grocery clerk, a hotel housekeeper's assistant in 3 different cities. She'd been a daughter doing her best to cross a long distance. She'd been in love once, completely and badly, with a man who was charming and present right up until the moment she discovered she was pregnant, at which point he became absent so quickly it was almost impressive. She'd been a mother for 3 years, and it was the only thing on the list that felt like it had always been true, like it was less a role she'd taken on, and more a fact about her that had simply been waiting to become visible. She was, despite everything, the exhaustion, the carefully managed budget, the loneliness that she acknowledged to herself only late at night, after Maya was asleep, in those quiet 20 minutes before she fell asleep herself, happy in the way that people are happy when they have something that matters. Not dazzling, all the time happiness. The quieter kind. The kind built of small moments. Maya's sleeping face, the smell of coffee in the morning, a sky that went pink before the sun went down. She was not looking for anything at Hartwell Manor except a paycheck and stability.
She was very clear about that.
She was also, she told herself firmly, not the kind of person who noticed the way a billionaire's face changed when her daughter climbed into his lap. She was absolutely noticing. The thing she noticed most was the listening. Ethan Hartwell listened to Maya the way very few adults listen to children, not with half his attention while the rest handled something else, not with a bright, performed interest of someone enduring an interaction, but with his full and genuine self. When Maya told him, on a Tuesday morning, that her stuffed elephant was sick and needed medicine, he asked 3 follow-up questions. When she explained, at considerable length, her theory that clouds were made of fluff like her pillow. He did not correct her but asked, with apparent interest, what she thought happened to the fluff when it rained. When she cried, once, briefly, when she fell against the edge of the coffee table. He didn't panic or overreact, but simply picked her up with careful hands and held her quietly and said, I know, until the crying stopped. You're good with her, Sophia said one morning, meaning it as something neutral and finding, when the words were in the air, that they carried considerably more weight than she'd intended. He looked up from the newspaper he'd been reading, actually reading it, she noticed, for the first time she could remember, rather than staring through it. She makes it easy, he said. There was a pause that lasted exactly long enough to be meaningful. She makes everything easy, Sophia said honestly. He looked at her then. Really looked, the way he looked at Maya, with the whole of his attention, and Sophia felt it land the way attention like that always lands when you're not expecting it, like stepping into warmth after a long time in the cold. How long have you been doing this alone? He asked. The question was quiet and direct, and so entirely without pity that it didn't sting the way the question usually did when other people asked variations of it.
3 years, she said.
Since before she was born, really? He nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he'd already understood. That's a long time, he said. It is, she agreed. And then, because Maya had chosen that precise moment to arrive from wherever she'd been, carrying her stuffed elephant and 3 crayons, and the absolute certainty that both adults in this room were exclusively interested in what she had to say, the conversation ended. But it didn't disappear. It sat between them for the rest of that morning, quiet and warm and not entirely resolved, the way meaningful things often do. That evening, Ethan walked the garden later than usual. The sky was the color of bruised plums at the edge and clear pale blue at the top, and the air was cold and clean, and he walked with his hands in his pockets and thought about a question he had not expected to ask, and the honest, unhesitating way it had been answered. 3 years since before she was born, really. He thought about what it meant to carry something that long without putting it down. He thought, with a rueful clarity that surprised him, that he might know something about that. It happened on a Saturday morning in October, when the trees on the manor's grounds had gone the colors of fire, and the air through the windows smelled like something ending and something beginning at the same time. Sophia arrived to find a message from Mrs. Calloway saying that she'd taken ill overnight and would need the day, and that Sophia should manage the morning's residential duties on her own, referring to the household manual if needed. Sophia had been there long enough that this didn't unsettle her. She settled Maya in the staff room with breakfast and her elephant and a cartoon on the small tablet she brought in her bag, and went to work. She was in the linen closet on the 2nd floor, counting pillowcases with the focused attention that domestic work required, when she heard footsteps in the corridor, not Maya's sneaker flash pattern, which she could identify from 2 rooms away, but something heavier. She stepped out. Ethan was in the hallway. He was not in his usual morning clothes. He was wearing an old university sweatshirt and jeans that had seen better decades, and his hair wasn't quite organized, and he looked, without the careful architecture of his professional presentation, startlingly human. Also, she registered with a start, he was carrying Maya. Maya was asleep. She was curled against his chest with her cheek on his shoulder and her arms tucked in, and her elephant pressed between them, deeply and completely asleep in a way that small children achieve immediately and without any apparent transition. Sophia froze. She wandered up, Ethan said, quietly, so as not to wake her. His voice was doing the thing it always did when Maya was involved, that frequency shift, that lower, warmer register. Apparently the cartoon ended, and she wanted to find you. She made it to the second floor landing and then told me she was sleepy, and that was that. Sophia crossed the corridor in 4 steps. I'm so sorry, let me. She's asleep, he said, and the 2 words held a careful, almost protective quality. Don't wake her. Sophia stopped. She looked at her daughter's sleeping face against his shoulder, and then at the man holding her daughter, and felt something shift inside her chest that she'd been very carefully not acknowledging for several weeks. She trusts you, Sophia said softly. Yeah, Ethan said. And his voice had something in it that wasn't quite sadness and wasn't quite wonder, but lived somewhere between the two. I know. They stood in the hallway. Can I ask you something? Sophia said. He looked at her over Maya's sleeping head. You have all of this, she said carefully. All of it. And I've watched you for a month, and you're the loneliest person I've ever seen. And I'm not saying that to be unkind. I'm saying it because I think you already know. He was quiet for a moment. I know, he said. Why? She asked. He was quiet for longer this time. Long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. My father was like me, he said finally. Good at building things. Bad at this. He shifted Maya slightly, careful. I watched him keep everyone at arm's length his entire life, and then one Tuesday morning he was gone, and he hadn't said the things he meant to say to a single person. Not even my mother. Not even me. His voice was steady and absolutely unsparing, the voice of someone telling the truth that has been waiting a long time to be told. And I swore I wouldn't be him. And then I became him anyway. Sophia looked at him. You're not him, she said. He's not the one holding my daughter in a hallway. Something happened in his face. The glass, she thought. The glass he kept between himself and the world. She watched it shift, not shatter, not dissolve, but shift, the way ice shifts when the temperature has finally, definitively changed. The way things that have been held rigid for too long begin, eventually, to remember that they were never meant to be this way. His eyes were bright. He looked down at Maya and then back at Sophia, and she held his gaze because it felt important to, because some moments require witnesses, and this felt like one of them. I don't know how to do this, he said. And the admission from a man who was practiced in the art of knowing exactly how to do everything was so raw and so honest that it took her breath. Yes, you do, Sophia said. You've been doing it for a month. She glanced at her daughter, sleeping peacefully between them. She already knows. The hallway was quiet. Outside, the October trees flamed red and gold against the gray sky. Inside, very slowly, with the careful intentionality of a man learning to trust the ground beneath his feet again, Ethan Hartwell exhaled. Would you like to have tea? He asked. When she wakes up. Both of you. I'm not asking as your employer. His voice was measured, but there was an uncertainty in it that was new and somehow made him more himself than any version of him Sophia had seen before. I'm asking as, he paused. Searched for the word. Someone who doesn't want to sit alone anymore. Sophia looked at him for a long moment. Yes, she said simply. We'd like that. Maya stirred and opened her eyes and looked at the two of them with the ancient, knowing calm that children sometimes produce when they've been paying more attention than anyone realized. Tea, she said hopefully. And Ethan laughed, really laughed from somewhere deep, the way a person laughs when something hurts and heals in the same motion, and Sophia laughed too, and Maya, satisfied, put her head back down on his shoulder and declared she needed 2 more minutes. They gave her the 2 minutes. The year turned, the way years do, with the slow inevitability of something that cannot be argued with. November came with bare trees and the first frost on the garden, and December with holiday preparations that Sophia managed with quiet efficiency, and Mrs. Calloway, fully recovered, supervised with iron satisfaction. January arrived cold and clear, and February brought the kind of pale, hopeful light that announces spring is somewhere ahead even when you can't see it yet. Ethan Hartwell had dinner alone in the formal dining room 3 fewer nights a week than he used to. This was not a dramatic change. It was not announced. It happened the way most real changes happen, through accumulated small choices that were individually unremarkable and collectively transformative. It started with tea, which it had, in every meaningful way, begun with a month and a half earlier. Sophia and Maya joined him on Saturday mornings after the wandering in hallway incident, and then it became Tuesday mornings too, because Maya had made it clear that she saw no reasonable argument against it, and then it became most mornings, and then Ethan, quietly, without making a production of it, asked Mrs. Calloway to set 2 additional places at the kitchen table for staff breakfast when Sophia was working, because the formal dining room was a bit much for a 3-year-old, and he'd taken to doing his morning emails at the kitchen table anyway, which was information Mrs. Calloway received without comment and with the private expression of a woman who has been waiting a long time for a particular kind of sense to prevail. He learned things about Sophia the way you learn things about people you actually pay attention to, gradually in pieces, each piece fitting into the one before it to build something that felt, increasingly, like understanding. He learned that she'd grown up in a small Texas town with a grandmother who made tamales from a recipe she'd never quite written down and told stories that went long past bedtime. He learned that she'd wanted to study literature, that she read constantly, mostly novels, some poetry, things borrowed from the library because her budget didn't extend to buying them. He learned that she sang to Maya at night, old songs her grandmother had sung to her, in a voice she described as adequate and which he heard once through a cracked-open door and which was, in fact, quite beautiful. He learned that she was funny, a dry, quick humor that arrived without announcement and disappeared before you were sure you'd caught it. He learned that she was stubborn about the things that mattered and genuinely flexible about the things that didn't. He learned that she cried at certain commercials and felt no apparent embarrassment about it. He learned that she was sometimes lonely too, that beneath the capable, warm confidence she brought to every room she entered, there was a tiredness she rarely acknowledged, the specific exhaustion of a person who is doing a beautiful job of something that was always meant to be shared. He learned these things and found that he wanted to know more of them, and that the wanting felt less like the acquisitive impulse that had driven most of his adult life, and more like the feeling he got when a book was good, and he didn't want it to end. Maya, for her part, proceeded through the winter with the untroubled certainty of someone who has correctly assessed a situation and sees no need to revisit the assessment. She informed her stuffed elephant that Ethan was her friend. She drew him pictures, elaborate, abstract, deeply sincere, that he received with the gravity they deserved and placed, without comment, in a frame that now sat on the corner of his desk in the home office. When he was on conference calls that ran long and she was in the kitchen with Mrs. Calloway, she could sometimes be heard asking, at intervals, when he was done, and Mrs. Calloway reported this with a satisfaction that she didn't even pretend to conceal. In February, on a Sunday evening when the house was quiet and Maya was asleep on the couch with her elephant and a blanket that Ethan had tucked around her with the focused care of someone performing a task that matters, Sophia said, "What are you doing?" He looked up from the book he'd been not quite reading. "What do you mean?" "I mean with this." She gestured, a small movement that encompassed the room, the sleeping child, the two of them on opposite ends of the couch in the comfortable proximity they'd fallen into over months of evenings exactly like this one. "What are you doing, Ethan?" He put the book down. He looked at her for a long moment. "I'm figuring it out," he said. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm 33 years old, and I have spent the last 6 years being very successful at the wrong things." He looked at Maya, sleeping with her whole self the way she did everything. And I think I was given a very direct piece of advice several months ago by someone who was standing at my chair and couldn't even see over the table. He looked back at Sophia. I think I've been trying to follow it. Sophia was quiet. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready for, he said carefully. I know what this looks like from where you're standing. I know how different everything is. I know that you're cautious for good reasons.
He paused.
I just want you to know that I'm not confused about what's happening. I know what I want. I just don't want to be careless with it. The house was quiet around them. Outside, the February sky was dark and scattered with stars, and somewhere in the garden the fountain ran on its winter setting, a soft, continuous sound. She already picked you, Sophia said softly. Maya already made this decision. You know that. I know that, he said. Kids are very rarely wrong about people, she said. I hope not, he said. She's not. Sophia looked at her daughter's sleeping face, and then at the man sitting across from her who had, without announcement or agenda, rebuilt something in himself over the course of a winter using the daily, patient, ordinary materials of a child's trust and an honest woman's company. I'm not either. He reached across the space between them. His hand, careful and deliberate, found hers. She let it. They sat like that in the quiet house with Maya asleep between them, and the stars outside, and the fountain's soft sound, and the warmth that had been building in the east sitting room since a Saturday morning in September, when a 27-pound explorer in strawberry leggings had pushed open a door 3 inches and leaned in and told the truth. The shortbread tower had fallen and they had built it again, and it was taller now. On the desk in the home office, in a simple frame, a crayon drawing, abstract, earnest, made by small hands, showed 3 figures holding hands under a sun that took up most of the sky. Maya had pointed to each one and named them. That's me. That's Mama. That's you. She'd looked at Ethan with the level gaze of someone checking that her assessment had been received. You're in the family, she'd announced. I decided. He'd held that piece of paper for a long time. He held it still, in the way you hold things that have rearranged something permanent inside you, long after the frame went up and the morning moved on, and Maya went back to her coloring and Sophia laughed at something Mrs. Calloway said in the kitchen. The man behind the glass had spent 6 years building walls with extraordinary skill and dedication and had been dismantled, completely and irrevocably, by a 3-year-old with mismatched pigtails and sneakers that lit up when she walked. And the thing that he would think about later, in the moments that people think about when they're reviewing the architecture of how their life changed, was not the fortune or the manor or any of the things he'd spent his adult life accumulating. It was a whisper, for words, delivered over the edge of a chair by someone who barely reached the table. You look lonely. Can I sit with you? The answer, it turned out, was always yes. The answer, it turned out, had always been yes. It just took the right question, asked by the right person, with nothing in the world to gain except the company, to make it possible for him to say it out loud. Yes.
Please.
Sit with me.
Stay. The end.
For every child who walked through a door that was meant to stay closed and changed everything on the other side of it.